Joining us right now to make heads or tails of the Denver Broncos and what they're up to, and they're right in the middle of it, sending off two offensive stars to the AFC North over the last 24 hours. Pittsburgh now home to Russell Wilson, Cleveland home to Jerry Jeudy, Mark Schlereth home to the NFL on Fox, and a lot of Super Bowl rings. Good to see you, Mark Schlereth. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, Rich. Good to be with you, buddy.
Good to see you. Are those dog treats in that jar over your left shoulder? What do we have right there? What do we have in that?
I have no idea. Listen, man. I just live here occasionally. I don't know anything that goes on inside this house. I have no. There's new stuff all the time. I'm like, oh, that's great.
Okay, well, you know where the helmets then behind you came from. You don't know about the books, maybe. All right, very good. Let's get into it, man. Why is Russell Wilson no longer on the Broncos, Mark?
I think that I think sometimes when you look at statistics and people will say, well, 26 touchdowns versus 8 interceptions, they'll look at those things and say, well, he had a pretty good season. And ultimately, I get where people get confused about, what makes a successful season. And those stats would lend itself to you believing he was successful. But when you look deeper into the way he played, into just the season in general, there were so many things that were missing. And, he's one of the worst quarterbacks in football when it comes to throwing people in the middle of the field, intermediate routes. He threw more balls behind the line of scrimmage than any quarterback in football, I think, since 2005. I mean, it just was when you dig deeper into the coach's film, there's so many things that are inadequate. And let's not forget, this is not only the first, this is the second team that have basically said, we're going to take a quarterback who's in his quarterbacking prime, and we're going to eat $111 million in dead cap money because we don't want to be associated with him anymore. And that's Seattle and Denver. So there's a lot of things that on the surface, when you dig deeper, that he just doesn't do very well. And ultimately, that's why he is now in Pittsburgh.
And there's a lot of sacks that he's taken as well. And I know, like, the number of times we see cutaways to Sean Payton after the sacks. But that said, it's just tough to wrap your head around the fact that Russell Wilson needs to compete for a job with a kid in his third year of his career who really hasn't proven much other than the fact he played well for Pittsburgh. And by that, I mean collegiately. And then for about, what would you say, 4 to 6 weeks at the end of his rookie season, and he's entering year 3. It's tough to wrap your head around that, Mark,
Yeah, I understand that. And I think that people look at what happened, over a decade ago with the Seattle Seahawks. Listen, in Pittsburgh, and I said this a couple of months ago when they got Arthur Smith as their offensive coordinator, that's the best landing spot for Russell Wilson. You have an elite level defense like they did in Seattle. If you can create a run game like Arthur Smith did in Tennessee when Ryan Tannehill took over, and obviously Derrick Henry was just an absolute beast, but they had a great offensive line as well. When you do all those things, I mean, in the play action game, the boot keep game, there's two types of play action. I differentiate play action. I look at the run action play action, right, which is really hard run, fake, boot keep out the backside, create a linear progression where receivers are right there, 1, 2, and 3 in your sight level. Like, that's the run action play action. Then there's a play pass where you're keeping 7 guys in protection, you're dropping back, 7-step drop, you're about 11 yards, and you're really running 2-man routes. You post with an over, and whichever way the safety plays, if he plays the deep post, you throw the over. If he plays the over and sucks in, you throw the post. Like those are things that he can do, and he can still throw the deep ball well. But in the middle of the football field, seeing receivers in the middle of the football field, throwing with anticipation, throwing guys open, those things he never has really done well, and the last couple of years it's been awful. He's been flat awful here.
Mark Schlereth here on the Rich Eisen Show. Why isn't Jerry Jeudy a Bronco anymore?
Because he's not a good football player. He's an exceptional athlete, and there's a big difference between being a great athlete and a good football player. And when you look at Jerry Jeudy, there's a lack of, obviously he's got a skill set, and the guy, is obviously an exceptional athlete, but he doesn't get involved in the running game. When he's not the primary target, he doesn't draw coverage. So he doesn't do some of the things that are required for you to be a good football team. And I think that's the one thing we get, because talent is easy to see. That's like the NFL draft and the combine. And you do a great job, by the way, Rich.
Thanks,
I
brother.
watch a bunch of the combine stuff. But the problem with the combine and athletic skills is athleticism is the easiest thing in the world to see. I can see a great athlete, right? I can see guys who can run and jump and do all those things. It doesn't necessarily equate to being a great football player. And then also when you talk about team, and this is what I love about just the National Football League in general, is that to be a great team, you have to have guys that are willing to sacrifice one another for one another. And the key to winning championships is when you care more about the guys you play with and you care about yourself. Like, that's the key to winning championships at this level. And Jerry Jeudy has not displayed that he can do any of those things. Like, when he doesn't get the ball, he complains, he whines about it, he cries about it, and he's dropped a ton of balls over the course of his career here. He's just not a great football player. He's an exceptional athlete. And you would hope, like, for me, my hope would be that being traded as a former first rounder and only getting a fifth and sixth rounder in return, that would be something that would be a wake-up call for you. But if you don't ever take responsibility for the fact that you really didn't produce and you're a first-round bust in Denver, if you're not going to take responsibility for that, then my thought process is, why would you ever take responsibility if it's, if you're a victim and it's everybody else's fault? Then do I think he's going to have success? No, I hope he does. I hope he looks at himself critically and says, man, I've got to be better at X, Y, and Z. But so far, there's nothing in his career that would tell me he would do that.
In the meantime, Cortland Sutton took to, and this is a 21st century way of trying to read tea leaves, obviously, when you're looking at Instagram accounts and Twitter accounts. Instagram, he was wondering what was up with letting Jerry Jeudy go. And then on his Twitter account, they're saying he's playing with his emotions at this point. Twitter account, he removes the Broncos from there because I guess he's maybe getting rid of, he says, what's next? What advice would you give him, knowing Sean Payton and perhaps a little insight on what the plan is there?
Yeah, well, I think that ultimately when you're in a full teardown, and I agree with the full teardown, I mean, you've been putting Band-Aids on gaping wounds here for 8 years. So I agree with the full teardown. And when that's the case, you got to be ready to move on for Cortland Sutton. He's got to be ready to move on, because I think it's only a matter of time before he's no longer on this roster as well. And I think one of the big problems with teams that are perennial losers, remember, like the Denver Broncos were a crown jewel in the National Football League. They are no longer relevant, and they haven't been for quite some time. And there's not one guy that's been drafted since 2015 that has ever tasted. There's not one guy on this team that was in a draft pick that's ever tasted the playoffs. It's not one. And I think one of the problems when you have losing issues within a franchise, there are guys that are part of that franchise that think they, are working hard, that think they're preparing, that think they're studying, that think they're really doing this, but they don't have the knowledge of what it really is required to be great in this league. And so you think you're doing things, you think you're sacrificing, you think you're doing all these things, and you're really not even close. And so that's another part of the purge here that's going on that I think is imperative. I think it is time to, like I said, clean house, rip off the Band-Aids, and go in a different direction, because what they've done here in the draft picks that have been made previously, there are a couple players walking away in free agency from not having anybody from the 2018, the 2019, and the 2020 draft class on their roster. That's just, it's pathetic.
Mark Schlereth, three-time Super Bowl champion here on the Rich Eisen Show. So what do you think is Sean Payton's plan, 12th overall here, and how does it play into the quarterback plan? What would you counsel here?
Yeah.
Mark?
Well, I think for me, I look at a guy like Sam Darnold, and if you could do a Baker Mayfield deal with a guy like Sam Darnold, who, came in and it's funny, I did the last 2 games in San Francisco for Fox and talked to Sam Darnold probably for 40 minutes on the field in those 2 games. Talked to Kyle Shanahan back-to-back weeks. Sam Darnold walked into a situation where he had to compete. There was Trey Lance and there was also Brock Purdy there. Knew that he had opportunities elsewhere for more money for a chance to start, knew that probably wasn't going to happen. But Kyle Shanahan said this. He went to the Jets. He was drafted to the Jets. Jeremy Bates was the offense coordinator that was trying to run the Peyton Manning offense because of his relationship with Peyton and his time with Peyton. And he goes, there's one person in the world that can run the Peyton Manning offense, and it's Peyton Manning.
Right.
Like, he's the only one. So you take a rookie with the Jets and try to put him into that situation.
Right.
And then he went to Carolina, and you're running a collegiate type of offense in Carolina. He said the first time he was ever exposed to a legitimate progression offense was the last 8 games or so when Steve Wilkes took over and Ben McAdoo became the offensive coordinator. And so he went to San Francisco simply to say, hey, man, I need some football rehab, and I need to learn the NFL game as opposed to the college game. And so I just see the maturity there. I see a guy who's unbelievably skilled, arm talent, athleticism, all those things. I see a guy that has a chance, to me, to rectify kind of where he was drafted and the fact that it didn't work out in the first couple of stops.
Do you go ahead and choose a quarterback 12th overall if they're sitting there, if it's McCarthy or it's Penix, if you do the Darnold thing, Mark?
Yeah, I think the McCarthy for me is one of one, in that he's the only guy in this draft class. College football is really hard for me to watch. Mm-hmm. And one of the things about college football is there's this static formation aspect, 2x2 formation, 3x1, 4x1, whatever, but it's very static. There's not a lot of motion. There's not a lot of pre-snap, responsibility at the quarterback position. And then you're really eyeballing one guy. Where's my best matchup? I'm going to throw it to that guy. And if that guy doesn't get open, then I'm going to scramble around and make something big happen. And, it's no fault of college football or the kids that play it. It's just, because of the NCAA and the lack of time you have to actually study the game, I think that's what it's morphed into. That's what it's become. JJ McCarthy is one of one when it comes to being on the line of scrimmage, to me, seeing different personnel groupings, changing with shifts or fly motions, changing the strength, redirecting traffic, being in charge at the line of scrimmage like an NFL quarterback is in charge of the line of scrimmage. And I think that's probably why he shot up draft boards. So if he was there, it wouldn't surprise me if Sean Payton would go in that direction. But if it's the rest of the guys, I wouldn't count out them trading back in this draft. They don't have a second rounder. See if they can get back, still get a really good football player, and then try to accumulate another draft pick along the way.
Well, and based on what you just said about college football, do you think the Bears should still go for Caleb because he's so seemingly unicorn-like, or stick with Justin Fields?
Right,
Mark, what do you think?
I think they'll go. I think they'll go that route, and I think that's probably the right route to go with Caleb Williams. Again. Like, the one thing that you can really identify when you're evaluating college quarterbacks is athleticism. Like, arm talent and athleticism are the two things you can really, that you can really evaluate. I mean, the rest of the time, think about it. You looked at the sideline. Everybody looks at the sideline. They line up in a static formation, and, you've got barn, rooster, chicken on 2. Let's go, and you look at the card, and that's what you're running. So there's so many things. There's so many things that you have no idea what a guy can and can't do based upon the way they run offense in the college game. I think it's one of the reasons that Jim Harbaugh won a national championship. Let's just go out and bludgeon people with 90s style football because nobody plays it and nobody can probably defend it. And I think you probably kind of take that formula to just about anywhere in the nation. You could have a lot of success doing that.
All right, before I let you go, again, I'm looking at your remarkable background. I don't see a crystal ball, but I'm going to ask you to use one figuratively anyway. Your week 1 starter in Pittsburgh is going to be who, Mark?
I think it'll be Russell Wilson.
You do?
I just don't think there's, there'll be a competition there, but I think Russell, based on, and this really goes back to my belief in Arthur Smith and what he did in Tennessee with Ryan Tannehill. I think that's the direction they'll go. So I think Russell will win that competition. Meaning
why? Because Russell is mobile. Because Tomlin, and whatever conversations he had with Russ over the weekend weren't like wink, wink. There's no wink, wink with Tomlin.
No.
You know what I mean? Like, so when they say there's going to be a competition, and they will, there's going to be one. And Pickett is a talented, albeit inexperienced, third-year player who needs to prove himself.
Right.
I think, again, it does appear to be the case. We won't have it handed to him. And we all know, as you pointed out, whatever Russ's limitations are at age 35 and to age 36 they are. I mean, I think there's going to be a real competition, Mark.
Oh, I think it's going to be real as well. But I think that Arthur Smith will create an offense based on the run game, based on multiple tight ends, based on heavy personnel, based on, anytime you get in those type of offenses, you're gonna create a middle of the field closed, a single high safety situation, which gives you access one-on-one to the outside. Like whether it's cover one or cover three, when you have a single safety in the middle of the football field, you've got access to the outside. Meaning your one-on-one, any vertical route is going to be one-on-one because you cover one and cover three become the same thing. So there's nobody in my mind that throws a better deep ball than Russell Wilson. So in those situations, if you've got an off corner, you can throw the hitch. It's an easy read. It's easy to do. And I think Arthur Smith will create an offense in which Russell can survive and Russell can thrive in that style of offense. And I think he'll be better at that than Kenny Pickett will be. But, I do believe I'm 100% with you. There will be a legitimate competition there.
Mark, appreciate the time, brother. Really.
Anytime, Rich. Take care, buddy.
I'm going to hold you to that. Yeah. Thank you.
Hey, every time you call, I come on.
And I do appreciate that, Mark. You're the man. Yeah. You're the man. You be well. You take
Thanks,
care.
Rich. Take care, buddy.
That's the great Mark Schlereth, nice. NFL on Fox, 3-time Super Bowl champ right here. All right, so he thinks Russ is going to win the competition. Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.